The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a cathedral made of light and metal, its curved walls rising hundreds of meters toward a dome of pure crystal that showed the stars beyond. And at the center of this magnificent space stood a single human man who felt very small indeed. Daniel Pierce had served as Earth's High Ambassador to the Council for 7 years. And in that time he had learned to read the subtle body language of 17 different alien species. But today he did not need any special skill to understand what was happening, because the hostility in the room was as obvious as a punch to the face. The Nalori delegate, a creature covered in scales that shifted colors with its mood, had turned a sickly gray-green that Daniel knew meant deep discomfort, while the Theshan representative, a being of flowing robes and multiple tentacles, had wrapped itself so tightly that it looked like a ball of fabric rather than a living creature. "Honored members of the council," Daniel said, forcing his voice to remain calm and steady, "I come before you today to invoke Article 7 of the Galactic Charter, the mutual defense clause that every member species signed when they joined this body." He activated a holographic display that showed the eastern spiral arm of the galaxy, highlighting 3 small dots of blue light against the vast darkness of space. "These are our colony worlds," Daniel continued. "New Eden, New Canton, and Meridian Prime. Home to 40 million human beings who left Earth to build new lives among the stars." He pressed another control, and the display shifted to show a massive red wave approaching the blue dots. A wave made up of thousands of small triangular shapes that represented warships. And this is the Varath Collective Invasion Fleet. 3,000 vessels armed with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, crewed by a species that has exterminated 4 intelligent races in the past millennium. And they will reach New Eden in 6 weeks. The chamber remained silent. But it was not the silence of shock or sympathy. It was the silence of people who already knew what Daniel was going to say and had already decided not to help Chancellor Vorax of the Kelesian Empire rose from his elevated seat, his pale blue skin and large black eyes giving him an appearance that humans had once found beautiful and now found deeply unsettling. "The Council acknowledges the concerns of our human colleagues," Vorax said in a voice that dripped with false sympathy, "and we have deliberated extensively on this matter over the past several days." Daniel felt his stomach tighten because he knew what was coming next. "After careful consideration of all factors involved," Vorax continued, "the Council has determined that military intervention against the Varath Collective would not be in the best interests of galactic stability, and therefore the petition for mutual defense is denied." The words hung in the air like poison gas, and Daniel stood frozen for a long moment as the full weight of what had just been said crashed down upon him. "Denied," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. 40 million human lives are threatened with extinction, and you are telling me that you will not honor the treaty that you yourselves wrote. Vorax spread his hands in a gesture that was meant to seem helpless, but came across as dismissive. "The situation is complicated. Ambassador, the Varath have given us assurances that they have no interest in Council space, and your colonies were established in a region that has always been considered disputed territory." "Disputed by whom?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising now as anger began to replace shock. "When we joined the Council 12 years ago, you gave us star charts that clearly marked those systems as available for colonization. You told us exactly where to build our new homes. There may have been some confusion in the cartography department," Vorax said smoothly. "These things happen when dealing with the complexities of galactic administration." Behind Daniel, Admiral Catherine Cole stepped forward, her face a mask of cold fury that she struggled to keep under control. And she leaned close to whisper in his ear. "They planned this," she said quietly. "All of it, from the very beginning. They set us up to fail." Daniel turned slightly to meet her eyes and saw the terrible truth reflected there. Because everything suddenly made sense. the way the Council had welcomed humanity with open arms, the way they had encouraged expansion into specific regions, the way they had insisted on technology sharing that always seemed to flow in one direction. Earth had been played from the very start, built up just enough to be useful as a buffer state or a trading partner, but never allowed to become powerful enough to challenge the established order. "I see," Daniel said, turning back to face the Council with new understanding burning in his eyes. "I see exactly what this is." Vorax's expression flickered for just a moment, a tiny crack in his diplomatic mask that revealed something ugly underneath. "I'm sure I do not know what you mean, Ambassador. The Council simply cannot justify risking galactic peace for the sake of 3 small colony worlds." "3 small colony worlds full of human beings," Daniel said. "People with families and dreams and lives. People who trusted that the galactic community would protect them. People who are now going to be slaughtered or enslaved because this Council is too cowardly to honor its own commitments." A murmur ran through the chamber, and several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But none of them spoke up in humanity's defense. "Your emotions are understandable but unhelpful," Vorax said coldly. "Perhaps if Earth had developed more advanced military capabilities before expanding into dangerous regions, this situation could have been avoided." And there it was, Daniel thought, the final piece of the puzzle. The Council had insisted that Earth share all military research as a condition of membership, had provided observers and inspectors to ensure compliance, had worked diligently to keep humanity weak and dependent. Catherine gripped Daniel's arm, and he could feel her trembling. Not with fear, but with rage barely contained. "Is this the Council's final word?" Daniel asked, his voice now dangerously calm in a way that made several nearby delegates edge away from him. "It is," Vorax confirmed. "We advise Earth to seek diplomatic solutions directly with the Varth. They may be open to negotiation if approached with appropriate humility." This session is adjourned. The delegates began to file out of the chamber, some of them having the decency to avoid eye contact, while others looked at the human delegation with expressions that ranged from pity to contempt. Daniel stood in the center of the great chamber as it emptied around him, and for a long moment he simply stared at the symbol of galactic unity that hung above the Chancellor's platform. A symbol that had just proven itself to be nothing more than a beautiful lie. "What do we do now?" Catherine asked quietly. Daniel turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. A cold determination that transformed his diplomatic face into something hard and unforgiving. "We go home," he said. "We tell Earth exactly what happened here. And then we remind the galaxy why humanity should never have been underestimated. They have 3,000 warships," Catherine reminded him. "We have maybe 200, and ours are supposedly inferior to anything the Varth possess." Daniel smiled. "And it was not a pleasant expression, supposedly," he repeated. "Tell me, Admiral, do you really think that humanity showed the Council everything we have? Do you really believe that a species that went from horse-drawn carriages to splitting atoms in less than a century would simply accept technological inferiority?" Catherine stared at him for a long moment, and then a matching smile spread across her face. "No," she said slowly. "No, I do not suppose we would." They walked out of the Council chamber together, leaving behind the empty seats and the hollow promises. And as they boarded their shuttle for the journey back to Earth, neither of them looked back. There was nothing left to see, but there was everything left to do. The galaxy had made its choice, and now humanity would make its own. The news reached Earth like a shockwave traveling through water, spreading outward from government channels to military bases to news networks to ordinary homes where families gathered around screens with expressions of disbelief and growing anger. In the great underground bunker beneath the Swiss Alps that served as humanity's unified command center, The leaders of every major nation had assembled for the first time since the formation of the United Earth Government. And the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Admiral Nathan Cross stood at the central holographic display. A man of 60 years with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death to be surprised by anything. But even he felt the weight of what he was about to reveal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the silent chamber. "As of 16 hours ago, the Galactic Council officially refused to honor our mutual defense treaty, which means that 40 million human beings on our 3 colony worlds have been abandoned to face the Vorath invasion alone." General Lisa Murray of the European Combined Forces slammed her hand on the table in front of her. "How is this possible?" she demanded. "We signed that treaty in good faith. We shared our technology as they required. We followed every rule they set for us." "That is precisely the problem," Cross replied calmly. "We played by their rules, and their rules were designed to keep us weak." He activated a new display showing the known military assets of the United Earth Defense Force, and the numbers that appeared made several people in the room wince visibly. 212 combat-capable vessels, Cross continued, against the Vorath fleet of 3,000. And according to official council assessments, our technology is approximately 2 generations behind the galactic standard. Colonel Benjamin Hayes, a stocky man with a thick southern accent, let out a bitter laugh. "So we're supposed to just sit here and watch our people die? Is that it?" "No," Cross said, and something in his voice made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "No, that is not it at all." He pressed a control on his wrist unit and the holographic display changed completely, replacing the sad little fleet they had all been looking at with something that made several jaws drop open and shock ships appeared in the display. Hundreds of them, sleek and angular, and absolutely unlike anything the Council had ever seen from humanity. Their design spoke of power and speed and deadly purpose. "What the hell am I looking at?" General Murray Breathcross allowed himself a small smile. 8 years ago, when we first joined the Galactic Council, a small group of us recognized that something was wrong with the deal we were being offered. The technology sharing requirements were too specific. The territorial assignments were too convenient. Everything seemed designed to keep us dependent on Council goodwill. He highlighted one of the new ships on the display, rotating it slowly so everyone could see its features. So we created a parallel development program, completely off the books, hidden in facilities that officially do not exist, staffed by scientists and engineers who were listed as retired or deceased, funded through channels so buried that even most of our own governments did not know about it. Secretary Patricia Dunn of the American Defense Department leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "Are you telling me that you have been running a secret military program without governmental oversight for nearly a decade?" "Yes," Cross said simply. "And before you get angry about that, Secretary, I would remind you that the Council had observers in every one of our official research facilities. Observers who reported everything we did to the same people who just sentenced 40 million humans to death." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "So what do we actually have?" Colonel Hayes asked, his previous bitterness replaced by something that sounded almost like hope. Cross began, highlighting systems on the displayed ships, quantum fold drives that allow near instantaneous travel between any 2 points in space, making our ships faster than anything in the galaxy. Directed energy weapons that are 3 generations beyond what the Council thinks we possess. And this, he zoomed in on a small device mounted on the hull of each vessel. We call it the equalizer. It generates a localized field that neutralizes the shield technology used by every major species in the galaxy. We reverse-engineered their own systems and turned them into a weapon against them. Commander Sarah Bennett of the Pacific Fleet raised her hand. "How is that possible?" The council inspected all our research. They inspected what we wanted them to inspect, Cross replied. Humanity has a long history of hiding things from occupying forces. And make no mistake, that is exactly what the council was. An occupying force that convinced us to invite them in. He changed the display again to show production. Facilities scattered across the solar system. Hidden in asteroid belts and buried beneath planetary surfaces. 247 capital ships. 1,200 support craft. And this, the final image appeared on the display, and several people actually gasped. It was a ship. But calling it a ship was like calling a hurricane a breeze. It stretched 5 kilometers from bow to stern and bristled with weapon systems that defied easy counting. The Leviathan, Cross said quietly. A mobile fortress carrying enough firepower to crack a planet, crew of 12,000. And completely undetectable by any scanning technology the Council possesses. General Murray stared at the massive vessel with something approaching awe. Why did you not tell us about this before? Because the more people who knew, the greater the chance of discovery, Cross replied. And because we hoped we would never need to use it. We hoped the Council would honor its commitments and humanity could take its place among the stars peacefully. He turned off the display and faced the assembled leaders directly, but they have shown us what they truly are. And now we must show them what we truly are. Colonel Hayes stood up from his seat with a fierce grin spreading across his weathered face. So what is the plan? Admiral, the Vorath fleet reaches New Eden in 6 weeks, Cross said. We will be there waiting for them. And we will demonstrate to the entire galaxy that humanity is not a species to be trifled with. And after that, Secretary Dunn asked, what happens when we have saved our colonies? Do we just go back to pretending everything is normal? Cross shook his head slowly. No. Madam Secretary, after we deal with the Vorath, we are going to pay a visit to the Galactic Council. And we are going to have a very direct conversation about the future relationship between Earth and the rest of the galaxy. What kind of conversation? General Murray asked. Admiral Cross looked around the room at the collected leadership of humanity. At the men and women who represented every nation and culture on Earth, united for the first time in history by common purpose. The kind of conversation that involves all of our new ships and absolutely no pretense of diplomatic courtesy, he said. They wanted humanity brought to heel. They wanted us weakened and desperate. Instead, they have created something they will never be able to control. He straightened to his full height, his eyes burning with cold determination. They created a humanity with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. And by the time we are done, the galaxy will never forget what happens when you betray the human race. The room erupted in discussion as plans began to form and orders began to flow. But beneath all the practical considerations was a current of something primal and powerful for the first time in 12 years. Humanity was no longer playing by someone else's rules. Now they would make their own. New Eden was a world that lived up to its name. A planet of rolling green hills and crystal-clear lakes and forests that stretched from horizon to horizon under a sky of perfect blue. And for 3 generations, humanity had poured its hopes and dreams into making this distant world a second home. 8 million people lived here now, in cities that blended seamlessly with the natural landscape and farming communities that dotted the fertile valleys. And they had built schools and hospitals and libraries and all the other things that turned a colony into a civilization. But today, all of that was silent. The streets empty and the buildings dark. Because everyone who could move had retreated to the emergency shelters that had been carved into the bedrock. Beneath the planet's surface, in the main command bunker, Governor Rachel Patterson watched the sky through sensor feeds that showed what the naked eye could not see. The approaching nightmare of the Vorath invasion fleet. How much time do we have? She asked quietly. Her military advisor, Captain William Cooper, checked his readings with hands that trembled slightly despite his best efforts to stay calm. They will be in weapons range within 4 hours. Governor, after that they will begin orbital bombardment to soften up our defenses before landing troops. Rachel closed her eyes and tried to find some reserve of strength that would help her face what was coming. And our defenses consist of what? Exactly. 3 orbital defense platforms with outdated weapons. A ground-based missile system that might take out a handful of their ships before they destroy it. And approximately 2,000 military personnel with small arms. Against 3,000 warships, and however many soldiers they carry. Yes, ma'am. Rachel opened her eyes and looked at the young captain with something that might have been pity, or might have been resignation, so. We are going to die. Captain Cooper did not answer. Because there was nothing to say. They both knew the truth. The only question was whether death would come from orbit or whether the Varath would take the time to land and make it personal meanwhile. In the void between the stars, the Varath fleet moved like a great metal tide toward its helpless prey. Warmaster Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship. The Devastator, watching the small blue planet grow larger on his view screen, and his mandibles clicked with satisfaction as he contemplated the slaughter to come. He was ancient by human standards, nearly 300 years old, and in that time he had personally overseen the extinction of 4 intelligent species. Their names now forgotten by everyone except the historians who recorded. Varath Victory's humans would be the 5th. Signal from the colony, his tactical officer reported. They are requesting terms of surrender. Kethver's clicking laugh echoed across the bridge. How predictable these soft creatures are. They always hope that submission will save them. Inform the colony that their surrender is accepted, and that population processing will begin when we make landfall. What are the processing parameters? Warmaster. Standard protocol. The young and the strong will be evaluated for slave labor. Anyone with technical skills will be sent to the breeding programs, and everyone else will be culled for resources. The tactical officer transmitted the message without hesitation because this was simply how things worked in the Varath Collective. The strong consumed the weak, and that was the natural order of the universe. Warmaster, another officer called out. Sensors are detecting an energy signature directly ahead. It appears to be some kind of spatial distortion. Kethver turned toward the sensor display with mild curiosity. Explain. Unknown. Warmaster, the readings are unlike anything in our database. It almost looks like space itself is folding inward at multiple points, before anyone could speculate further. The distortion resolved itself into something that made every Varath on the bridge freeze, and shock ships appeared where there had been nothing, materializing out of the fabric of space itself in perfect formation. And they were not the primitive vessels that the Council had described to the Varath. They were something else entirely. Admiral Nathan Cross stood on the bridge of the Leviathan and watched the Varath fleet scramble in confusion, their orderly formation breaking apart as ship captains tried to understand what they were seeing. Open a channel, he ordered. All frequencies. Lieutenant Sandra Park, his communications officer, worked their console with practiced efficiency. Channel open, Admiral. Broadcasting on every bandwidth the Varath use. Cross stepped forward until he was centered in front of the main view screen. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the void to every ship in both fleets. This is Admiral Nathan Cross of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered human space with hostile intent. You have threatened human lives. You have believed the lies of cowards who told you that we were weak. He paused to let the words sink in. Today you learn the truth. You have exactly 60 seconds to reverse course and withdraw from this system. After that, there will be no negotiation, no mercy, and no survivors on the Devastator. Warmaster Kethver recovered from his initial shock and felt a surge of anger that overwhelmed any caution he might have felt. How many ships? He demanded. Approximately 250 capital vessels and over 1,000 support craft. War Master, we outnumber them 10 to 1. Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields. Destroy them all. The tactical officer hesitated for just a moment. War Master, their technology is unknown. Perhaps we should assess. I said destroy them, Kethver roared. Attack formation. All ships, back on the Leviathan. Admiral Cross watched the timer on his display count down while the Loreth fleet began its advance. They are not retreating. Admiral, Commander Aaron Graham reported from his station. No, Cross agreed. I did not expect them to. Signal all ships to activate equalizer fields on my command. At exactly 60 seconds, the Vareth fleet had crossed barely a fraction of the distance between the two forces. The weapons charging, but still out of range. Time is up, Cross said quietly. Then louder, all ships engage across the human fleet. The equalizer devices activated simultaneously, generating overlapping fields of precisely modulated energy that spread outward like ripples in a pond and on every Varth ship. Something impossible happened. Shield generators that had protected their vessels for centuries suddenly sparked and flickered and died, leaving the great warships naked and vulnerable for the first time in living memory. What is happening? Keffer shouted as alarm screamed across his bridge. Why are our shields failing? No one had an answer because no one had ever seen anything like this. And while the Varath scrambled to understand what was happening, the human fleet opened fire. The directed energy weapons that Cross's secret program had developed were 3 generations beyond anything the Council knew about. Beams of focused destruction that could burn through armor like a hot knife through butter. And they reached out across the void with terrible precision. Vareth ships began to die. Tactical doctrine that had served the collective for millennia was built entirely around the assumption that their shields would protect them. So they had never developed contingencies for fighting without that protection. Their formations were designed to maximize shield overlap rather than defensive maneuvering. Now those formations became killing fields. Captain Cooper watched from the bunker on New Eden as the sky lit up with explosions, his sensor feeds showing him a battle that should have been impossible. What am I seeing? Governor Patterson demanded. I do not know, Cooper replied, his voice shaking, but I think someone just came to save us in space. The Devastator tried to flee, its engines burning at maximum as War Master Keffer finally understood that he had been lured into a trap. But the Leviathan's main gun tracked the fleeing flagship with cold precision. The weapon that fired was unlike anything else in the galaxy. A beam of pure white light that channeled the power of a captive star. And when it struck the Devastator, the massive warship simply ceased to exist. Death died without ever understanding what had happened. The battle lasted 22 minutes. And when the firing stopped, 412 Vareth vessels had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. AEAs had surrendered unconditionally, and the rest had fled into the darkness between stars. Human losses were 17 ships damaged and 3 destroyed. A casualty rate so low that it would reshape galactic military thinking for generations. Admiral Cross opened the channel to the planet below. Citizens of New Eden, this is Admiral Cross of the United Earth Defense Force. You are safe. Earth has not forgotten you. Earth will never forget you. In the bunkers beneath the surface, 8 million humans heard those words and began to weep with relief and joy. Their prayers answered in ways they had never imagined possible, and across the galaxy, news of what had happened began to spread. Carried by faster-than-light communications to every world and station that had ears to hear, humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The news of what happened at New Eden spread across the galaxy like wildfire burning through dry grass, carried by every communication system and whispered in every port and trading station, where beings of different species gathered to exchange goods and gossip. The Vareth Collective, a power that had dominated their region of space for 3,000 years, had been humiliated. Their supposedly invincible fleet scattered and broken by a species that the Council had dismissed as primitive newcomers to the cosmic stage in the great halls of power on a dozen worlds. Leaders who had participated in the betrayal of humanity gathered with their advisors and tried to understand what had gone wrong. Chancellor Vorix of the Kelsian Empire stared at the tactical reports with his large black eyes, his pale blue skin gone nearly white with shock. "This is impossible," he said for the fourth time in an hour. "The humans cannot have technology this advanced. We monitored all of their research. We had observers in every facility." His military advisor, a scarred veteran named Commander Thales, shook his head slowly. "The reports are accurate, Chancellor. The human fleet used some kind of weapon that neutralized Vorith's shields completely, and their ships appeared out of nowhere using a form of travel we have never seen before." "The fold drives," Vorix muttered. "The theorists always said such technology was possible, but we were decades away from practical implementation. How did the humans develop it first?" "I do not know, Chancellor. But I think the more pressing question is what they plan to do next." As if in answer to that question, new reports began flooding in from the border systems. The human fleet was not stopping at New Eden. After securing the planet and leaving a defensive garrison, Admiral Cross had pushed his forces forward toward the other threatened colonies. And everywhere he went, the pattern repeated at New Canton. The defending Vorith squadron had attempted to flee rather than fight, but the human ships had run them down with ease, their fold drives allowing them to appear ahead of the fleeing vessels and cut off any escape at Meridian Prime. The Vorith commander had tried to negotiate, offering to withdraw peacefully in exchange for safe passage. But Admiral Cross had simply replied that the time for negotiation had passed and demanded unconditional surrender. The Vorith surrendered. They had no other choice within 3 weeks of the battle at New Eden. All 3 human colony worlds were secure, and the Vorith Collective had lost over 600 warships, nearly a quarter of their total fleet. But the humans showed no signs of stopping. Admiral Cross gathered his forces at the newly liberated world of Meridian Prime and addressed his crews through a fleet-wide broadcast. "Sailors of the United Earth Defense Force," he said, his voice carrying to every ship in the formation, "we have achieved what many thought impossible. We have saved our people and proven that humanity will not be bullied or betrayed without consequence." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was harder. "But our work is not finished. The Vorith came to our worlds because they believed we were weak. Because the Galactic Council told them we were weak. Because our supposed allies deliberately set us up to be destroyed. Across the fleet, men and women who had fought and bled for their species listened with grim attention. We could stop here, Cross continued. We could secure our borders and go back to pretending that the galaxy is a fair place where treaties mean something and alliances can be trusted." His eyes burned with cold fire. "But if we do that, this will happen again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year. But eventually, some other species will decide that humanity is a soft target. And our children or our grandchildren will face the same choice we face now." He straightened in his command chair. "I say we end this today. I say we pursue the Vorith to their homeworld and show them, and everyone else, exactly what happens when you threaten the human race. But I will not order you to follow me into that fight. This is a choice each of you must make for yourselves." The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Across every ship in the fleet crews raised their voices in agreement, the sound carrying through corridors and compartments like a wave of defiance. Not a single ship chose to turn back. Meanwhile, on Carveth, the Vorith homeworld, Supreme Commander Dek Skar gathered the remaining military forces of his species and prepared for a battle he knew he could not win. Dek Skar was old. Even by Vorith standards, his scales faded and scarred from centuries of warfare. and he had seen enough to understand that the universe had changed in ways that could not be undone. "How many ships can we field?" he asked his advisors. 900 combat-ready vessels. "Supreme Commander, another 300 could be made operational within a month." "We do not have a month. The humans will be here in days." He studied the tactical displays that showed the approaching human fleet. Smaller than his own force, but carrying weapons that had already proven themselves superior to anything that Vorath possessed. "What about allies?" one of his younger officers suggested. "The Council guaranteed our territorial integrity. Surely they will intervene." Dexgar let out a harsh, clicking laugh that held no humor. "The Council, the same Council that promised us easy prey. The same Council that assured us human technology was primitive. The same Council that sent us into a trap they had helped to create." He turned to face his officers with ancient eyes that had seen too much. "The Council used us. Just as they used the humans, they wanted humanity weakened, and they wanted us to do the weakening. Now that we have failed, they will pretend they had nothing to do with any of it. Then, what do we do?" "Supreme Commander." Dexgar was silent for a long moment, considering options that ranged from glorious last stands to shameful surrenders. And in the end, he chose the path that gave his species the best chance of survival. "We prepare to negotiate," he said quietly. "And we hope that humans are more merciful than we would have been." 4 days later, the United Earth Defense Force emerged from Fold Space at the edge of the Karveth system. And Admiral Cross looked upon the Vorath homeworld with an expression that gave nothing away. "Status report," he ordered. Commander Graham consulted his displays. 900 enemy vessels in defensive formation around the planet, Admiral. "Their shields are up, but their weapons are powered down." "Powered down?" "Yes, sir. It appears they are signaling their intention not to fire first." Cross considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Open a channel to their command." The screen flickered and the scarred face of Supreme Commander Dexgar appeared. "Looking tired and resigned, Admiral Cross," the Vorath leader said. "You have come to finish what you started." "I have come to offer you a choice," Cross replied. "Surrender unconditionally, submit to human oversight, pay reparations to every colony you threatened or damaged. Do these things and your species will survive. And if we refuse, then Karveth burns. And when the ashes cool, we will find whatever survivors remain and give them this same choice. The only question is how many of your people die before you accept what is inevitable." Dexgar studied the human's face through the screen, searching for any sign of bluff or weakness, and finding none in the end. "The choice was not difficult. We accept," the Supreme Commander said. "What would you have us do?" "Power down your shields. Prepare to receive human inspection teams. And transmit a message to the Galactic Council telling them that Earth wishes to discuss the terms of our new membership." As Dexgar moved to comply, he found himself feeling something he had not experienced in centuries. A grudging respect for an enemy who had proven themselves worthy. The humans had won, and they had won completely. Now the question was what they would do with their victory. The Galactic Council chamber had hosted countless important moments in its 10,000-year history. Treaties signed and wars declared, alliances formed, and empires dissolved. But never in all that time had it seen anything quite like what was about to happen. Every seat was filled with representatives from the 17 member species. And beyond them, the observation galleries were packed with delegates from dozens of non-aligned worlds who had come to witness what everyone knew would be a turning point in galactic history. Chancellor Vorax sat in his elevated position and tried to project an air of calm authority, but his pale blue skin had taken on a grayish tinge that anyone familiar with Calassian physiology would recognize as barely controlled fear. The great doors at the far end of the chamber opened and a delegation of humans entered. They did not walk like diplomats, coming to petition a higher authority. They walked like conquerors who had already won and were simply here to collect what they were owed at. The head of the delegation strode Admiral Catherine Cole, now promoted to Supreme Commander of United Earth Forces. Her uniform immaculate and her expression carved from stone. Behind her came military officers, scientists, and diplomats, all moving with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly how much power they represented. Catherine walked to the center of the floor, ignoring the elevated platform traditionally used by petitioners, and stopped at the same level as the council members themselves, forcing them to look down at her or meet her eyes as equals. The council recognizes the representative of Earth, Vorax said, attempting to maintain procedural normalcy. We are pleased to see that humanity has resolved its difficulties with the Vorax Collective. Resolved, Catherine repeated, and her voice carried across the silent chamber like a blade. That is an interesting word for what happened. She turned slowly, making eye contact with every species that had voted against Earth's petition for help. 3 months ago, 40 million human lives were threatened with enslavement and extermination. We came to this chamber and asked for the help that was guaranteed by the charter you wrote and made us sign. The silence in the chamber was absolute. You refused. But more than that, you had planned for us to fail. Our intelligence analysts have captured Vorax communications that prove beyond any doubt that their military was acting on information provided by council members. Murmurs rippled through the observation galleries, but Catherine continued without pause. You knew exactly where our colonies were, exactly how our forces were deployed, exactly how vulnerable you had worked to make us. Humanity was never supposed to survive. We were supposed to be broken and desperate, ready to accept whatever scraps you decided to throw our way. She let those words hang in the air. You miscalculated. And now you are going to pay for it. Catherine produced a small device and activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of human fleets throughout the galaxy. And the sight of all those ships scattered across council space made several delegates visibly flinch. As of this moment, Earth has military assets within striking distance of every major council world. We have demonstrated that your shields are useless against our weapons. We have proven that your numerical advantage means nothing when facing an enemy who can adapt faster than you can react. She highlighted each council member's homeworld in sequence. We could do to you what the Vorax planned to do to us. We have the capability. Many of my people would say we have the justification. The fear in the chamber was almost palpable. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitives were now confronting the very real possibility that their civilizations might cease to exist. But we will not, Catherine said. And some of the tension eased, though not by much. Not because we are weak, not because we have forgiven you, but because we are better than you. She deactivated the display. Here are Earth's terms. And I want to be absolutely clear that these terms are not negotiable. The chamber waited in breathless silence. First, full council membership with all rights and privileges for humanity. Effective immediately, no probationary periods, no restrictions, no observers in our facilities. Vorax opened his mouth to object, but Catherine continued before he could speak. Second, recognition of human sovereignty over all our current colonial territories, plus the former Vorax border systems that we now occupy by right of conquest. Third, complete technology sharing from all council species. Every database, every research archive, every development program, shared with Earth without restrictions or delays. Fourth, reparations from every species that provided intelligence or material support to the Vorax, calculated based on the damages we sustained and the lives that were threatened. Fifth, and finally, permanent human oversight of the Council's Military Coordination Committee. Every decision about collective defense will require human approval. Chancellor Vorix finally found his voice. This is completely unprecedented. The Council cannot simply surrender its authority to a newcomer species. There are procedures and protocols that must be. The Council can and will do exactly what I've described. Catherine interrupted, her voice cutting through his protests like a knife. Because the alternative is that we leave. She looked around the chamber again, and if we leave, we take with us any pretense that this body serves a purpose beyond protecting the interests of those already in power. Without us, you are nothing more than a collection of species waiting for the next threat that you cannot handle alone. Her eyes found Vorix and held him in a gaze that made the ancient diplomat want to look away. You wanted humanity contained, controlled, useful, but never powerful. Instead, you created something you will never be able to control. A humanity that knows exactly what you are and what you are capable of. She turned toward the exit, her delegation moving to follow. You have 24 hours to accept our terms in full. If you do not, we will pursue our interests without you. And you can spend the rest of your existence wondering when we might decide that forgiveness was a mistake. The humans walked out in perfect formation, and behind them the chamber erupted into chaos as delegates shouted at each other in a dozen different languages, but Catherine Cole did not look back. She had said everything that needed to be said. The ball was now in the Council's court, and everyone knew there was only one choice they could make 22 hours later. Chancellor Vorix transmitted Earth's acceptance of all terms to every world in Council space. The galaxy had been put on notice, and nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks following the Council's capitulation were a whirlwind of change that touched every corner of the galaxy. And nowhere was that change more visible than on the worlds that had once looked down upon humanity as primitive. Newcomers on Calasia Prime, the homeworld of Chancellor Vorix's species. Human inspection teams arrived to catalog the technological databases that were now being shared with Earth. And the Calasian scientists who had once mocked human understanding of physics found themselves explaining their life's work to young engineers who asked questions that revealed depths of knowledge the Calasians had never suspected. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Gray led one such team through the great archives of Calasian scientific achievement, and he could not help but notice the way the alien researchers watched him with a mixture of resentment and barely concealed fear. This section contains our research into quantum communications, his Calasian guide said, gesturing toward a vast chamber filled with crystalline data storage units. It represents 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge. Marcus nodded and began scanning the storage units with a device that looked deceptively simple. Interesting, he murmured after a moment. You have been approaching the problem from a fundamentally different angle than we did. Your mathematics are more elegant, but our solutions are more practical. The Calasian stared at him with wide black eyes. You understand this work. I have a doctorate in quantum field theory from MIT and another in xenophysics from the European Space Academy. Marcus replied without looking up. Your council spent 12 years telling themselves that humans were intellectually inferior. Did it never occur to anyone that we might have been hiding our true capabilities? The guide fell silent, and Marcus continued his work, cataloging knowledge that would be transmitted back to Earth, where it would be analyzed and integrated into humanity's rapidly expanding understanding of the universe. Meanwhile, on the Vorath homeworld of Karveth, a different kind of integration was taking place. Supreme Commander Thexgar, now serving as the liaison between his defeated species and their human overseers, found himself spending more time with the human occupation forces than he would have ever imagined. Possible Admiral Nathan Cross had established his headquarters in what had once been the Vorath Military Command Center, and he had invited Thexgar to observe human methods of organization and governance. You confuse me. Dexgar admitted one evening as he watched human officers coordinating reconstruction efforts across the planet. "You had every reason to destroy us, to make an example that would terrify the galaxy. But instead you are rebuilding our infrastructure and feeding our civilians." Cross looked up from his work with an expression that was difficult to read. "Would you have preferred destruction?" "I would have understood it," Dexgar replied. "The strong consume the weak. That is the natural order. Maybe that is how things worked before," Cross said. "But humanity has learned some hard lessons about what happens when you treat conquered peoples as resources to be exploited rather than potential allies to be cultivated." He turned back to his display, which showed supply distribution patterns across several Varth population centers. "We are not doing this out of kindness, Dexgar. We are doing it because a Varth collective that is stable and productive serves our interests better than a Varth collective that is desperate and resentful. You are building us into an asset rather than destroying a threat." "Exactly. Your people have skills and knowledge that can benefit humanity. And a generation from now there may be Varth serving alongside humans in joint ventures that neither of us can imagine today." Dexgar considered this for a long moment. "Your species is more dangerous than we ever suspected," he said finally. "Not because of your weapons or your technology, but because you think in ways we cannot predict." Cross allowed himself a small smile. "I will take that as a compliment." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as humanity established its new position in the cosmic order. And not everyone was pleased with the changes in the shadows of council space. Species who had not been directly involved in the betrayal of humanity watched and waited and planned, trying to understand how the balance of power had shifted so dramatically and what it might mean for their own ambitions. The Veshan Collective, a species of hive-minded beings who had always resented Kelesian dominance of the Council, saw opportunity in humanity's rise, and their queen dispatched envoys to Earth with proposals for alliance and cooperation. The Nalori Republic, caught between fear of human power and resentment of their own species' complicity in the betrayal, struggled with internal debates about how to position themselves in the new galactic landscape and in the deepest reaches of unexplored space. Other powers stirred. Ancient civilizations that had watched the development of the current galactic order with patient interest, and now saw reason to pay closer attention to a species that had upset so many assumptions. Supreme Commander Catherine Cole, now established in the human embassy on the council station, received daily briefings about these developments and worked to stay ahead of the constantly shifting political currents. "The Veshans want an audience," her aide reported. "They are proposing a bilateral trade agreement that would bypass council oversight." Catherine reviewed the proposal with careful attention. "They are testing whether we will play by council rules or create our own," she said. "And they are hoping to position themselves as our preferred partners. What is your decision?" "Commander," Catherine considered the implications for a long moment. "Accept the meeting, but make no commitments. We need to understand what they want before we decide whether to give it to them. And we need to make sure any deals we make serve human interests first and foremost." "Understood, Commander." As her aide departed to arrange the meeting, Catherine looked out the window at the vast expanse of stars that surrounded the station. Humanity had come so far in such a short time, from newcomers to conquerors to power brokers. But she knew that their position was still precarious. The Council had been humbled, but not destroyed. And there were plenty of species who would be happy to see humanity fall. The next phase of their journey would require just as much courage and cunning as the battles they had already won. And Catherine was determined that when the history of this era was written, humanity would be remembered not just as survivors, but as the species that had reshaped the galaxy itself. The work was only beginning. 6 months had passed since the reformation of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new Normal, where humanity stood at the center of power rather than at its margins. Earth itself had been transformed by the sudden influx of alien technology and the demands of maintaining a military presence across dozens of star systems. And the old national boundaries that had divided humanity for millennia seemed less important now that the entire species faced outward toward the stars in the great plaza at the center of Geneva, where the United Earth government had established its headquarters. People from every nation gathered to watch the unveiling of a monument that would commemorate the darkest and brightest chapters of humanity's journey into the cosmos. Daniel Pierce, now serving as the Secretary General of the United Earth government, stood before the crowd and prepared to deliver a speech that would be broadcast to every human settlement in the galaxy, citizens of Earth and all her colonies. He began, his voice carrying across the plaza through hidden speakers. We gather here today to remember those we almost lost and to honor those who saved them. The monument behind him was a towering structure of metal and light, shaped to represent a human hand reaching upward toward the stars. And at its base were inscribed the names of every ship and every crew member who had fought in the liberation of the VA colonies. 1 year ago, we believed we had found our place among the stars. We had joined a community of civilizations that promised peace and prosperity and mutual protection. And we had entrusted our future to beings who smiled at us while planning our destruction. The crowd listened in absolute silence when the betrayal came. We had a choice. We could have accepted our fate. We could have surrendered and hoped for mercy from those who had none to give. But that is not the human way. Daniel's voice rose with passion. Instead, we fought. We revealed capabilities that we had hidden even from ourselves. We proved that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. And we made the galaxy understand that threatening our people would bring consequences beyond anything they could imagine. He gestured toward the monument. The names on this structure belong to heroes, men and women who left the safety of Earth to defend strangers on worlds they had never seen. Some of them did not return, but their sacrifice ensured that 40 million of our brothers and sisters are alive today to raise their children and build their futures. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. But let us not forget what this monument also represents. A warning to anyone who might think that humanity has grown soft or complacent. We did not seek this power, but we will not hesitate to use it. We did not want this fight, but we finished it on our terms. Daniel turned to face the monument directly. To those who betrayed us, we have shown mercy. To those who threatened us, we have offered a path forward. But let no one mistake mercy for weakness or patience for passivity. He turned back to the crowd. We are humanity. We have clawed our way up from the mud of a single world to stand among the stars themselves. We have faced every challenge that nature and now the galaxy has thrown at us, and we have survived. His voice rang with certainty, and we will continue to survive. Not as subjects or servants or tools to be used by others, but as equals, as partners, as a species that will never again allow itself to be caught unprepared. The crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city, and Daniel stepped back from the podium as the celebration began. Catherine Cole found him in the reception hall afterward, nursing a glass of wine and looking tired but satisfied. "Good speech," she said, taking a seat beside him. "I meant every word of it." "I know you did," Catherine replied. "That is why it worked." The council delegates were watching the broadcast. I am told several of them looked distinctly uncomfortable. Good. They should be uncomfortable. They should remember what happened every time they consider whether humanity might be an easy target. Catherine nodded slowly. "Speaking of which, I have news from the Theshan negotiations." Daniel looked up with renewed interest, and they have agreed to our terms. Full technology exchange, military coordination protocols, and preferential trade agreements. that will give us access to resources we desperately need. In exchange for what? Our support if the Calassians ever try to reassert dominance over the Council. They have been waiting centuries for someone to break the old power structure, and they are more than happy to back us as the new center of gravity. Daniel considered this for a moment. We are building an empire. Catherine, not through conquest, but through alliance. Through making ourselves indispensable to everyone who wants the old ways to change. Is that a problem? I do not know. Our ancestors built empires before, and they always ended badly. With war and collapse and centuries of recovery. Catherine shook her head. This is different. We are not subjugating anyone. We are offering partnership to those who want it and deterrence to those who do not. Every species that aligns with us does so because they see benefit in the arrangement. And every species that opposes us does so at their own risk. Exactly. Daniel drained his glass and set it aside. I suppose that is the best we can hope for. A galaxy that chooses to work with us because the alternative is too costly to contemplate. It is the most stable arrangement possible. Catherine agreed. Fear alone creates resistance, but fear combined with genuine benefit creates lasting order. She stood and extended her hand. Come on. The Nalori ambassador has been asking to speak with you. Apparently, they want to discuss their own alliance proposals. Daniel allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. The Nalori were part of the original betrayal. Yes. And now they are terrified of being left behind while everyone else aligns with humanity. Nothing motivates cooperation quite like the fear of isolation. Daniel managed a weary smile. When did you become such a skilled politician? Catherine, when I realized that winning battles is easy compared to winning peace. Now come on, we have a galaxy to reshape. Together they walked back into the celebration. Two humans who had helped save their species and were now working to ensure that such salvation would never be necessary again. The work was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. 5 years had passed since humanity's emergence as a galactic power, and the changes that had swept through known space were visible everywhere. One cared to look. The old council chamber still stood on its station at the heart of civilized space. But it was no longer the seat of supreme authority it had once been. Human advisors sat beside every major delegate and human ships, patrolled the space lanes that connected the great trading hubs. Admiral Nathan Cross, now retired from active command, stood on the observation deck of Prometheus Station, humanity's great military headquarters that orbited Earth like a second moon. And he watched the blue marble of his homeworld rotate slowly in the darkness. Daniel Pierce joined him there, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey that caught the light of distant stars. I thought I might find you here, Daniel said, handing over one of the glasses. I come here when I need to think, Cross admitted. When the weight of everything we have done gets a little heavy. Any regrets? Cross was silent for a long moment. Considering the question carefully, I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we had to show the galaxy what we were capable of. I regret that there are species out there who will never trust us because they fear what we might do to them. He took a sip of his whiskey. But I do not regret keeping our people alive. I do not regret making it clear that humanity will never be prey. And I do not regret proving that the Council's arrogance had consequences. Daniel nodded slowly. Catherine Cole is stepping down as Supreme Commander. She says she has done everything she can in uniform, and now it is time to let younger officers take the lead. I heard. Who is taking her place? Admiral Sandra Park. She was a lieutenant during the Battle of New Eden. Now she commands the 3rd Fleet. I remember her. Good officer. Calm under pressure. Exactly what we need for the next phase. Daniel raised an eyebrow. The next phase. Cross turned from the window to face his old friend. Did you really think we would just maintain the status quo forever? Daniel, we have spent 5 years consolidating our position and integrating the technology we gained from the Council species. But eventually, we will need to expand again. Expand where? We already control more space than we can effectively govern. Not expand our territory, Cross clarified. Expand our influence. There are species beyond Council space who have been watching what happened. Some of them see us as a threat, but others see us as an opportunity. He pulled out a small device and projected a map of the galaxy that showed gnome space as a small bubble of light, surrounded by vast unexplored darkness. We have only scratched the surface of what is out there. And somewhere in that darkness are civilizations that could be allies or enemies. We need to find them before they find us. Daniel studied the map with new understanding. You want to send expeditions into unknown space. I want to ensure that humanity is never caught off guard again. The Council thought they knew everything about the galaxy, and they were wrong. We need to know what else is out there so we can prepare for it. That could take generations. Then we had better get started. Daniel smiled despite himself. You never stop thinking ahead. Do you? It is the only way to stay ahead, Daniel. The moment we get comfortable is the moment someone starts planning our downfall. They stood together in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars that had once seemed so distant and now felt almost like home. Do you ever wonder how history will remember us? Daniel asked eventually. I try not to, Cross replied. History has a way of simplifying complicated people into heroes or villains. And I am not sure which category we will end up in. We saved 40 million lives, and we killed hundreds of thousands of Varth, and we humiliated the Council. And we reshaped the galaxy through a combination of force and diplomacy that future generations might find troubling. Daniel considered this. Does that bother you? Sometimes. But then I remember what the alternative was. I remember the reports from the Varth about how they processed conquered populations. And I remember that every one of those 40 million people is alive today because we were willing to do what was necessary. He finished his whiskey and set the glass aside. Let the historians argue about whether we were right or wrong. What matters is that we are still here to have the argument. The door opened behind them and Catherine Cole entered. Looking every inch the elder stateswoman she had become. Gentlemen, she said, I thought you might be hiding up here. The reception is waiting, and the Vishan Queen has been asking where you are. Daniel chuckled. Since when does the Vishan Queen care about retired admirals and aging politicians? Since we became the most important retired admirals and aging politicians in the galaxy. Catherine replied, Now come on. We have one more role to play before we can rest. Cross exchanged a look with Daniel, and they both rose to follow her. What role is that? Daniel asked. Catherine smiled. And it was the smile of someone who had fought the worst the galaxy could offer and emerged victorious. We are the reminder. Daniel, every time one of those council delegates sees us, they remember what happened when they underestimated humanity. They remember what happens when you betray Earth. She straightened her uniform, and as long as they remember, they will never make that mistake again. Together, the three of them walked back into the light. Representatives of a species that have risen from insignificance to dominance in less than a generation. Behind them, through the great windows of the observation deck, Earth continued its eternal rotation, blue and green and beautiful. The homeworld of a people who had learned the hardest lesson the universe could teach. Trust no one but yourself. Prepare for the worst, and when betrayal comes, make absolutely certain that your judgment is so thorough and so complete that no one ever dares to try again. The galaxy had received that message, and humanity intended to keep delivering it for as long as the stars continued to burn. This was not the end of their story, but only the beginning. And whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain: humanity would face them together. United and unbroken, and absolutely unwilling to ever be caught unprepared again. The cosmos stretched out before them, vast and mysterious and full of wonders yet to be discovered. And somewhere out there in the darkness, New adventures waited. But that is a story for another time.